Okay, so we want to talk through the proof of concept that Paul and I worked on last week or the last couple of days about the idea of rebuilding the sidebars for the super sidebar or the North Star as Vue component, so it's like a Vue app. So we spent a couple of days on that. Paul mostly on the Vue part, I mostly on the Rails part, like how to get the data there. So we got something going. Of course, it's a proof of concept, and I think as Sam put it in the issue description, he wanted one buggy, messy thing. So that's what you got. I'm gonna show you that and then go a bit through the questions that also Sam left on the issue and go a bit through this with you. And then we can just discuss as things come up. So let me get my screen share going. Okay, so I hope this works and you see my screen here.
I can see it.
Awesome. So like these are the questions I mentioned, including the answers I just provided earlier. So we have a bit of a guiding rails for the talk, but please also keep the notes in the document if something else other than this comes up, and of course jump in at any time. So the messy thing looks like oh sorry, the Zoom UI is here. Okay, the messy thing looks like this right now. So you see we got something going, and you can see here on the right that this is in fact done by Vue.js. Of course, a lot of things got skipped or just placeholders, like this is a link, this isn't. The menu is far from complete.
Is everyone else able to hear? Yeah, it looks like we lost Thomas.
I'm back. Sorry. I think the recording's still running, right? So I'll bring back my screen if no one else has yet. Okay. So the one thing for me to answer was like how to reuse most of what we got from the code that drives this on the backend, because it's quite yeah, complex, because it depends on if you're running in the EE, if you have a license that allows you to use like the security dashboards, for example. So like redoing all of that in an entirely different way, I think that would have been just out of scope of what we want to do. And how it works today is that this the logic what makes a sidebar basically is done in Ruby on the backend, obviously. And there are like three main classes that drive this. There's like a sidebar panel, that's basically the entire thing on the left here, which then consists of many sidebar menus. So like deployments is a menu, infrastructure is a menu, and so on. And usually these menus have menu items, and there are, for each of these three, there are Ruby classes that then have things like methods like render question mark, and in there you can put, okay, you render if the user has this and that license available. For illustration purposes, this is how it looks in MS Paint, basically. And those classes we do want to reuse, because there's a lot of code there that also like what are the URLs that show an active state when you are on them. Like all these things live in there. So what I did as a very first step of this POC is I went into the kind of the parent class of this all and added a very kind of trivial toJSON method to it, which just kind of opens up an object, throws in all the values we need, like a kind of current user, the counts for the to-dos, and also the renderable menus. That's a method coming from this class that says all the menus that should show in here, put them all in this JSON. And then when you want to like this totally works for the old panels. So like we had a state where we used the old projects panel contents basically, but with Vue.js. But it's also easy to create new panels. So here I call it super panel because obviously projects panel was taken already. And you can see I just from that panel I had this toJSON and I just added in some new, like this plan menu is new and the develop menu is new, but I also just threw in like the old settings menu, and as you can see, this works quite well. And maybe Paul, you can describe how the Vue.js part like picks it up and continues on the client if you want.
Yeah, so it's kind of the usual architecture that we use in several parts of GitLab. So the Vue.js. So we just initialize the Vue app on a given selector. We get all the data set from that selector, which is the data that Thomas built in the backend. And from there, we render the relevant elements from that JSON. For example, we render a list of GL collapse components that all include their nav items. That are basically links to the whatever path is in the JSON. Yeah, so it's nothing funky. It's pretty much the same as usual.
Right. So with most of the like logic still happening even on the back end, like even the decision, like is this the active link? This is like easier to do, I think, on when you're still in the Ruby where you have access to all the URLs helpers than redoing that on the front end, and then it just has it in the props basically. Okay, I'm the active one, and if I don't have any children, then I'm a link. Otherwise, I'm a collapse, and so on. So this is then quite nice to do. I think when we click around a bit, you is tricking me.
You're muted, Thomas.
I'm back. So what I was showing was that there is a small moment where the sidebar is not visible because it's now rendered by Vue.js and not server-side rendered. That's something we discovered as a possible blocker, or yeah, like maybe it's not good for also accessibility reasons. I started a conversation with Scott about that, but that's yet to find out.
Could you show that one more time? Just, I kind of missed. You said it rendered after, but I think I missed it. Ah, got it.
So I mean here, like the overlapping is just us not finishing the things, but if I go to also another project, you'll see it again. So it's empty for, I mean, it won't be empty for that long because it's my local development environment that's a bit slow. But I think it would be noticeable if we would do it like that.
Okay.
Okay, let me check what I've skipped over. So I think we've described how the data currently gets there. I've mentioned the issue with the perceived performance. One thing we did not measure, at least I did not measure, also is if the kind of this, I mean, it's not a round trip, but before we just rendered out this data model, this panel into HTML, and that's pretty straightforward. now we convert it into JSON base64 encoded and then do the reverse on the client. So I'm not sure if that has a noticeable performance impact. But that was just like the easiest way to do it for now, and could probably be tweaked. Then there was a question from Sam if we would be confident to if we go this way, remove the top bar from day one. I really can't answer that question fully, but I would think that if we do that and like we have it everything between behind the feature flag and the user toggle, doing it that way might make it a little bit easier in the sense that we don't have to kind of change the header based on these toggles, but it would just be like, don't show it. And then we have a bit of maybe missing links in the super sidebar, but at least we wouldn't run so much the risk of kind of messing with the existing top bar for the current navigation. So that's maybe one thing. And oh yeah, one thing I listed here as things we might run into, not so much of an edge case. I think we would definitely need to tweak the startup CSS a bit, because if I understand this correctly, all the CSS that is used in the sidebar needs to be in there. Otherwise, there's kind of a moment in building the page where it's using startup CSS, but not the full CSS bundle. So you could see like a change in fonts and so on, or like sizing and things. I think there's currently no example in there where it happens, but that's something to watch out for, I think. And oh yeah, then that rendering the sidebar client side, we need to figure out if that has any accessibility implications, also like in keyboard navigation, so I'm really not sure. And about the effort that this would take, I think it's quite doable. And like assuming that we're okay with not doing it server-side rendered, which would be another side quest, I guess. But since we can reuse most of the sort of like the authority code, just to reshuffle it a bit and maybe duplicate it for a while, but it's not really inventing something new. I think the scope, well, it would be in scope. And yeah, like shown in the prototype quickly, you can build like new panels while leaving the old panels alone without, like putting a lot of feature flagging in the same file. So that would also be, but that's true for if you do it with Vue.js or not, actually. And it still was nice to find that out. And then I think it depends a bit on the design, or like what we want from the sidebar, if it's just more effort to like do it with Vue, or if it turns out to be in the end that it pays off because we want to do something really sophisticated where, okay, it looks completely different for mobile or something. Like doing that with the old approach, that would become a bit of a headache because we kind of have to double render it and then do it all with CSS. So I think the more involved the design or the behavior of the sidebar is, the more I would lean towards doing it with Vue.js.
Thomas, could you just quickly explain what server-side rendering means in this case?
It's basically the reason why you see this sidebar only reappearing after a second, because it only gets now rendered or like drawn to the page when our JavaScript on the page is ready, and then picks up this data and says, okay, now I'm the Vue component I'm showing now. And before that, it was part of the initial HTML we serve with each request, even before the JavaScript hits.
Our old one is more like a native web component or something, and then the Vue is waiting for the server to return the data, and then that's the delay. Then it shows it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and that might be something where a screen reader gets a bit of a hiccup if you do it, but I'm not the person really to know if that's a real issue or just like something not. So we can.
Is there any world where you just render those first, like you just keep the placeholders there almost, and then they wake up to Vue later, so it like appears that it's performant?
Yeah, I think we do similar things in other places where instead of the real icon and the real text, you have like sort of a placeholder and you're just kind of guessing that each menu has about 8 entries or whatever, and then you show these skeleton loaders or what they're called. So we could, like, from the perceived performance, we could kind of masquerade that a little bit for sure. But yeah, in an ideal world, GitLab would have server-side rendered Vue, which is a thing, but that's a thing of the future for us currently, because we don't have that in our tech stack yet. There are initiatives to do this, but they're not yet available to us. So
okay. But that might be something to think about in the design too, if like what elements could render ahead, or I don't know if Nick has any ideas on that. What could make it look kind of like it's already there even while it's still loading? Do we programmatically decide those 5 top buckets, or everybody gets them every time, right? Like everyone gets, even if you're free, you would still get those, Nick, in your design with the sections would. So the vertical height wouldn't be changing based on access.
Yeah, I believe most people would have those, but I'd need to look at it a bit more offhand. I can't say for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's TBD, since we spoke with David and he mentioned, ultimate users may frequently be using some higher tier features. And so those may be available for those users, but not for users who are not at that tier. So that would be part of the research that we have upcoming to determine if that is viable or not.
So I think I mean, to look at the design, I think, well, also the POC, it's similar. Like certain things we could kind of have statically. I mean, but it would be duplication, of course, of effort. So we could have these things sort of in place, so it looks like half of it is already there, and maybe even these top pin things. But I tried to avoid that, because then we have like 1.5 implementations of this. But yeah, the perceived performance could be improved a little bit.
From accessibility side too, I don't know if we test on slower connections, but other countries sometimes have way slower than we do, at least in America. And that might be something to look at too, is just like how long does it take for the menu to come in on a slower internet?
When it comes to, you mentioned, Thomas, there'd be a duplication of effort if we did sort of some back-end rendering in addition to front-end rendering. That may be true unless the sort of interactivity is just completely different UI, right? So what I'm not too sure about is how some of these things interact. So like if you click on your work, what does that do? Does that replace all of, right? Okay, so technically nothing there would need to be aligned, I guess. Oh, okay, no, but you've still got the duplication of effort of like, how do you render an item, the icon and the text, and we'd implement that in Ruby and Vue, yeah.
Is this like something, I don't know how to ask that question. If we were to do server-side, if we were to implement the server-side view for this, is that something that is viable, or is that like, no, Tori, that's ridiculous, we're not going to do that? Like, could this be the first thing that is using that, for example?
That's a very on-point question, because one thing that was kind of cool also about this POC is that Hannes pinged us, who's in the incubation team. Let me find it somewhere here. Well, I won't. It was on merge request. Sorry.
Yeah, it's in DMR. Yep.
And he's currently exploring the idea how this could be done in our code base. but it's still a proof of concept itself. But he got notice of what we are doing in the proof of concept here, and pinged us saying he would like to try this as a use case, which is awesome. But I really don't know how many things there are still to fix in his, as far as I understood, still experimental approach. But there is already someone looking into that, so that's awesome. But I think it's nothing we should have as a hard dependency for the North Star.
Would he be able to do a POC or something that could prove it out at some point, kind of in parallel with the rest? What
I think
team
he's
is
planning
he
on
on?
it. I think that was his plan, to come up with a small POC based on our work. I don't know to what extent we need to collaborate with him to get something out. But yeah, I think he's considering it.
I guess, well, in order for it to be worthwhile, the sidebar, we would need to continue to build the sidebar in Vue, because that's what his proof of concept is relying on, really.
I have a question. Would it be like very bad experience if you render something like skeleton loader in HAML on server side, and then like so it won't be like empty box for the user. It would appear like something is loading, and I guess we will have like the smaller startup CSS because I assume it will be less styles to style the skeleton loader than the whole menu, and then the user will get the experience like he's waiting for something, and then we will replace that server side rendered skeleton with the Vue menu as a client rendered menu.
That would for sure be possible, and I think also not too much of a stretch, because it would probably already help a lot if we had this kind of colored upper thing already here, and these three panels and these things and this thing, and for the rest just a couple of lines of the skeleton. So I think for that we wouldn't need to duplicate too much, but a couple of CSS classes and the base structure. Yeah.
So HAML would render the skeleton, Vue would come in, and then the speeding up of Vue would be if we did it, that server side render.
It's not if we do this like Vue server, if the Vue application will be rendered on the server side, we'll get the full menu with the text and everything, like on the first load, user will see it immediately. What I'm talking about, what we have now is we will have the skeleton loader, like probably will have the purple box on the top, maybe not purple, another color, and the couple of lines that look like skeleton loader, and this will be rendered in HAML, and then the client side application, which will be done in Vue, will render like the full menu with text and all the JavaScript interactions, if you know, like make it collapsible and everything.
Lena, if you want to update my take at your bullet, I think I got it, but I may not have written it exactly, your idea on the agenda.
Yeah, I'll try to explain it better.
Thank you. I'm just trying to grok it from my point of view, where I'm not an engineer. Thank you.
So is the recommendation based off what we currently know from this POC to build from scratch and using Vue? I'm not sure if I caught that. Like, is that the recommendation? Or are we still not sure?
Olive, do you want to answer?
I'm not sure I have an answer. That's the idea behind this POC for sure. And so that UI jump is kind of the biggest limitation. If we consider it a blocker, we're going to have to find another approach. I think that Mark is suggesting that we build another POC where most of the sidebar is built in the backend, and then interactivity is being added client side. So that would be another approach, which wouldn't require that we build everything from scratch with Vue. So perhaps that's something that we should look into. Personally, I feel like building everything with Vue makes sense. But yeah, we're going to have to be mindful of that limitation. And if we consider it a blocker from a UX perspective, Vue might not be the right approach, I guess. So I guess it's a UX call in a way.
Okay. Nick, what are your thoughts?
Performance is the trade-off, just to make sure I understand the summary, right? Like Vue is working well, but it's a performance.
Yeah, I think it's perceived performance.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, which is what, yeah.
Sorry, Tori, what was your question again?
Yeah, so the question that is currently lingering is basically how big of a deal is it that the menus are loading in after the page loads? So from a UX perspective, I guess we need to determine like what our take is there.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult because like I don't understand like how long that wait could be or like what that impact is versus like what we have today. Like obviously I think a skeleton load could be a good like resolve for that, but obviously we wouldn't want it to take, you know, too long if it's a fairly large impact in terms of waiting for that many to load.
Would the next POC get us that information? The one that Mark was proposing? If we spent one more week and just got another POC?
No, well, what I was proposing would be basically what we have currently, where the sidebar is just visible on first load. So this current POC kind of tells us this more or less. Maybe we could do some optimization, like pull out a chunk of JavaScript that executes first and early somehow. Yeah, it feels like we just need to just go ahead with this and then see how it feels. And if we don't like it, then backtrack.
Yeah, like, is this a one-way door? Can we do that? If we really get into a state where it's perceivably slow, can we rip it back down to the old way?
Kind of starting over, right?
Yeah, that's starting over basically.
It's not ideal, but
I mean, to put it more optimistically, or put a more positive spin, some of the effort would not be wasted because like what makes a panel? Like if you do the new project panel where so you have develop and you have plan, like these the logical structure of those we built on the Ruby end anyway, and use them like that anyway. So that it's more like manual labor to create these menu items. Like you have to duplicate or like create a lot of these classes and stuff, which will be some effort, but that part won't be wasted if we then later say, okay, that view thing was not a good idea. Like that would stay, and sure, then we would need to think about how do we make the old sidebar HAML partials into what we want from the North Star. But at least the kind of the gist of it or the back end of it, we wouldn't need to throw away. Still a lot.
so if we need another week to do a POC, I'm game for that from the product side. I'm also okay if if engineering wants to make the decision and then we adapt once we try it or see. It sounds like we're moving towards Vue from just the discussion, but I'm sure there's still alternate opinions to that.
So mine, sorry, I myself would be happy if someone kind of takes the current POC and either tries to continue for a week or to do it totally different for a week. I think that would be beneficial either way. To kind of try to do it better, basically, and then learn from that.
Okay.
This is probably outside the scope of this, but I'm just curious, is there a scenario in the future where we only reload the sidebar when we need to, such as like going to a different project or going to the your work section rather than having to load it every time someone clicks a link within that section?
I'd say that's not yet on the horizon for our application.
Gotcha.
Okay, so it sounds like there's no decision as of right now, but we will spend one more week investigating. And who will be doing that? Who's taking the lead? Who or contributing on trying some new options in there?
Yeah, I wonder what exactly are we gonna try in the next week. Because from my point of view, the current POC is enough, right? I don't think that we need to invest much more effort in that POC, because we have a good idea of what the backend structure is going to look like. And then if we want to use that in the client side, we should just get started with the Vue implementation, right? So if we spend another week, I would try something completely different, like Mark was suggesting, for example. But yeah, I think that we need to have clear expectations from that POC before putting another week into it.
Maybe we can try this in with the skeleton loader, like just like to see how it looks like, how the user perceives it, and or maybe check with the, I don't remember what's the who was that engineer, how is this in with the server-side rendering of the Vue application is going. So because like this is our ideal way to have it to have Vue application rendered on the server side. So that's maybe we can get some answers there.
That sounds like a good idea.
If, say we start building out with Vue as it currently is, and then the POC that other engineer is working on looks successful, is there a migration path to that? Or are we blocked by that until we have a definitive answer?
I don't think that there would be much of a migration path. It should be pretty seamless. From what I've seen in the RFC, you can just write a Vue app as usual, and the backend should be able to render it somehow. So it should be pretty easy to just switch to SSR when and if that's ever implemented.
Okay, that's great. So yeah, maybe we can look at the skeleton loader, get a feel for that, and then ideally it transitions over to that other method. But we can, that's not blocking us because we can transition to it later if it's successful.
Another question I have, I saw we had 3 at the top. Is there any chance that this could slow way down when we have the whole menu going in plus all the subnavs? Like I know it's a POC, but did we test the full load of the current navigation?
So for a moment or for half an afternoon, we had the classic projects menu in there, and I didn't really spot like a difference. And one of the last things I did was that I added back like the old settings, like sub menu, which also has at least some entries. And I didn't notice anything, but I'm also not as good in counting milliseconds than a proper tool for that would be. But I think it's not a not a real issue where we completely scale away from having a reasonable load time. I mean, we don't plan to add 10,000s in there, right? So I think it's okay.
I don't like, if we could benchmark, it would be awesome just as a team. And I don't know how you all do it in Eng, but like the current load time of a project page and then the new nav would be useful information. Just to kind of see the difference in that. And then I know like one of the longest loading pages is the merge request page because it has so much content too. How does that a page that's that heavy end up working with the nav as well? Or does it not matter because they're completely decoupled? But those are questions I'd have. If we could just nail like the milliseconds on the old, milliseconds on the new, just some high level data, it would be helpful from my standpoint.
I have a question for Thomas and Paul. Did you think about the case that we render the initial navigation like we do now in HAML, like on server side, and then all new features like workspace menu and the flyout menu we render with the Vue application, and then later if we can render Vue application on the server side, we can switch like this initial navigation to Vue application. Would it be difficult path, maybe incorrect path?
So do you mean that we would be rendering the links in HAML, right? And then replace the links with the Vue app, or just add the interactive parts with Vue?
Yeah, like the new parts, like the flyout menu, like that shows when you hover over the menu item. So this would be the Vue application, and the workspace like drop down, it will be also the Vue application. But the initial part that is visible, like the menu, like all initial menu items would be built in HAML like they do now. And later, if this POC with server-side rendering of the Vue app will work out, we could switch the part that is rendered in HAML to Vue. Does it make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, so we haven't tried that. Yes, this POC was really trying to move everything to Vue. So I guess that we could give this a try, because the only interaction that we have in this main menu is being able to expand and collapse the sections, right? So perhaps this could be achieved with a details HTML element or some simpler JavaScript. I don't know.
I think it would be worth checking out, and especially then testing the idea by looking at the more complex behaviors we may want to have for like when you go to a smaller screen size or something. And because we know we're like doing something with Vue.js is probably rather simple, because you just do a couple of Vue VF ifs and there you go. But doing it like trying to do only these interactive bits and pieces, building on what we have today, I think that would be a great POC. Yeah.
So should we try that for the next POC or for the next week of POC?
I would go with just like checking how servers are side rendering of Vue app. How promising it looks for now, because it would be much easier to build like everything in Vue from the very beginning. And then if it is not promising, try like rendering the skeleton loader, and only after that try to render like the combined version. Like at least that's my vision.
I don't think that we should rely too much. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go.
Yeah, just want to mention that we shouldn't rely too much on that RFC for the SSR, right? Because we don't have any deadline on that. So I think it's a nice to have if it ever happens in the future, but we shouldn't count it as a something that's gonna happen soon, right?
That sounds like a good plan overall for next week.
Who's gonna do the proof of concept? Paul and me are both on PTO.
How long are you on PTO? All of next week?
And half of the week after, yeah. But
Right.
Yeah, same. I'm gonna be on PTO as long as the new POC isn't done.
Well, as the only other engineers on this call, I guess that falls to me and Lena.
Yeah, right. Maybe we finish once first and then then we'll switch to POC. I'll be interested to investigate it a little bit more.
I guess it doesn't have to be like a full week, but definitely also like even like aside the question with Vue.js or not, like tipping my toes a bit in the new design definitely helped me also like understand it a bit better and what we might kind of bump in anyway. And I think if you just all four check it out, and it's beneficial no matter what we do in the end. Already, like with context switcher, for example, we probably also could do that with HAML as well, right? It's not that interactive, but just someone trying to either do this way or the other way, we benefit.
So next week's holidays in the USA as well with Thanksgiving. I'll be out for some of that week as well, maybe the whole week. But it's probably a good time to do one more POC and then we could pick up our normal schedule when we get back. But let's also just check in with Sam. And if Lena and Mark could take the lead, that would be awesome.
Okay.
Thanks everyone for joining.
For myself, not for Mark. Sorry.
And for staying with me for so much overtime. That's awesome in a way. Please keep the discussion going in the issue, proof of concept issue. If you have any other ideas or concerns, and we can take it from there. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul and Thomas.